I didn't have the right mentorship at home. See, this is why it gets so complicated, right? So I didn't have the right mentorship at home. So when someone asks me, like, how do I change my situation? There's so many factors involved with it, because you're talking about your entire life situation. Like, what was your mentorship scenarios? What are your attributes that you were able to attain that would be helpful in finding this financial freedom and liberation? But also then you have to look, what are the ones that aren't helpful? What are the ones that are holding me back, right?
Okay, for someone who doesn't have a lot of money to invest, or comes from a really poor childhood and a poor life, not knowing how to get to the next step or invest or do any of this, what kind of advice do you have?
So I'm not someone that can claim to be an economic guru. I've made it to a plateau in life at this point, right? And that plateau is a fairly decent level, actually, in comparison, right, to so many people. And those layers go all the way to someone who is, living on the streets of Mumbai in a slum, or living on the streets of, Ecuador, or living on the streets of, somewhere in Niger, or wherever they're having conflict right now in Africa, right? Some place in Somalia. It goes really low to places where people are starving, right? And there's this whole layer cake, and I like that term, layer cake. I had a friend, when I was deep in the marijuana industry, introduced me to the movie Layer Cake, which is a movie with Daniel Craig, who was the last James Bond guy. For those of you who know, is I believe an English actor, British actor, and he was in this movie that, for all intents and purposes, was really a British remake of the movie Carlito's Way. And for those of you who are aware of this movie, Layer Cake, maybe you'll see why I'm referencing it. There's a lot of similarities to Carlito's Way and Layer Cake, although I'd say Layer Cake adds some nuance and adds a bit of a different perspective. And the movie's about lots of things. It's about drug dealers in the game and an illicit enterprise. And then there's also this merging with the legitimate businesses. And of course, there's a character in that movie who is big time. He owns skyscrapers. He's massive. He's almost like a Donald Trump character, but he's got his hands in some nefarious places, or in some, maybe I wouldn't, I would say some of the things he's doing are probably nefarious, but not that all black market is really even nefarious, right? Like, it's just people trying to get out of their circumstance, trying to make it, right? That's what was really sad about Michael K. Williams dying of an overdose with his show, which was, I believe, called Black Market? I forget what it was called. If you know who Michael K. Williams was, is a African-American actor that co-starred in the series Boardwalk Empire, and did a lot of things, and was a very articulate and very smart man. And was sad to see him pass away from opioid overdose when it seemed like he had gotten past his addiction. But without digressing, right, that show was about black markets and why people break the law and what they were doing. And he had a very non-judgmental perspective on it. And then after him, there was a new host that took over. I believe it was Rosie Perez, and she had a different perspective, far more, from what I understand. I didn't really watch it after that. I felt like it lost its appeal to me, but a more judgmental perspective on all this stuff. So again, a little bit of digression here, but looking at why people break the law, what people are willing to do, the lengths they'll go to make it out of their financial circumstance, to reach what here we've called for many decades, or maybe longer than even many decades, the American dream, which I believe is very much dying at this point. And how do you do it, right? And there's all these people out there, and you see these videos on TikTok, on YouTube, on this stuff. With these new powerful platforms that we have with social media and this ability to reach many, many people, that there's this, this perfect code, this encryption code, that if you unlock it, you can just become, a millionaire overnight, make, $20,000 your next month in business, make like all this stuff. And I have trouble buying that. I know people who have been struggling to get to that semi-retirement level, that next layer in the layer cake, for their entire lives, right? My mentor is one of them. He is now in his 60s, had a major setback when he had some issues with his health, and it was a serious health issue that his health coverage didn't cover everything, and it pretty much bankrupted him, being able to survive from that illness. And he had to start all over. And now he's in his 60s, and he's pushing really hard with all his business ideas. And he's always reading these business help books and reading from these gurus and people like Tony Robbins and Jack Canfield and all this stuff. And he's doing the best he can. There's a lot of other names. Like, and I'm not a guy who's an expert on all these names. All these guys are amazing business gurus. And, I guess there's people that make this work, right? There's people that maybe just have that right niche, that right whatever. I think this is an extremely, extremely complicated topic. And what I would say about me, right, what resonated with me was, and here's the messed up part, I didn't grow up actually poor. I grew up in a rough place, but my parents weren't actually poor, and that's given me a little leg up. If I didn't have the help I had from family, man, I wouldn't be where I'm at today. I'd still be probably decently okay, depending on what decisions I made. But I wouldn't have been able to make the strides that I made to even get where I'm at. And I'm struggling to hold on to what I got, as I believe we're seeing a push towards a corporate slave wage society, where basically the society is trying to push us all into being corporate slavers, basically. And you could see that even with, like, not to get into the crazy, the conspiracy stuff too much, but, with COVID, look what happened, right? These corporations were allowed to operate, were allowed to keep their doors open, were allowed to continue business, and small business owners were shut down. What was that about? And why do we allow it? Again, I know I'm digressing a little bit from the question here, but why do we allow it? We should have been out in the streets with guns. We should have been out there with AR-15 saying, fuck you, we're not putting up with that. And we didn't do it. We didn't do it, and look what happened. So many businesses got shut down. The gap, right? The window of opportunity is closing. There's movies like Pursuit of Happiness, right? Here's a great inspirational movie about a guy who went to extreme lengths to achieve financial success. And I say financial success specifically because that movie does not address emotional, mental, spiritual wellness. It only talks about his financial success, and he went to every length to the point of starving himself almost and fasting from water breaks and as few breaks to the bathroom as possible, living in a BART station bathroom with his son to achieve what he achieved, and good for him. And that's supposed to motivate us all, right? But I think those amazing stories like that, which are so motivational, are they're a bit of fairy tales. They're a bit of this hope, like, oh, there's the lottery winner over there. I can win the lottery too. I can buy that ticket. And I think it's getting harder and harder. And this is the part that I said to you before we started this, this talk right here, which was that I think I'm going to say some things you don't want to hear. And what that is I believe it's getting very, very difficult to where I'm wondering, even where I'm at, I own at least 2 properties. I've got my hand in a third. I've got this pretty large website project that I built. I've got an old business that's dying, that's really, really dying. And that business was really the old illicit businesses. I was very good at transportation and securities for interactions when it came to transactions. Let's put it that way, right? And we'll talk more about that. But basically, I was in the illicit market trade, made a lot of money from that, but also didn't have the training, mentorship, and advice to say, be very careful with your money, and these things don't last forever. Many of us believed that marijuana would be illegal for the rest of our lives. I think most of us never thought that marijuana would change the way it did. And we certainly not in our wildest dreams believed that mushrooms would start to become legalized and that psychedelics, LSD, even to this day, LSD is quite a big bad boogeyman, really. The federal government, most people's, when I say most people, the mainstream societal perspective on LSD is that it's this very scary, dangerous, pretty bad substance, and that's completely untrue. It needs the proper guidance. But the point is, we never thought it would reach that point. So a lot of us, you could see this with the drug dealers, right? You can see this with the people who dealt, whatever the substance is. This feeling that it would last forever, or they've got a couple different mentalities. Some of these guys don't think they're going to live very long, right? These guys that were growing up in Cabrini Green or the what are the name of the projects down in Louisiana where Master P's from, and some really ugly places where these guys were growing up. They saw a way to make some money, but they knew in their own minds, I think they don't believe they're going to live past probably 25, if that, right? So these guys went hard, lived hard, never saved money, and either ended up in prison or dead, right? But there's some truth to some of the almost getting into the Tony Robbins type stuff and things like that. That's also a mentality. Had they been with a different mentality of, no, I'm going to be the Musashi of drug dealers that makes it out of this, right? And saves my money and makes the right moves, right? And realizes that there are these very serious choke points for their success that they could have maybe had a different outcome, right? So like you see with the story of Frank Lucas and Bumpy Johnson, Frank Lucas was basically an apprentice. Bumpy Johnson was his mentor. Frank Lucas made a huge amount of money, but Frank Lucas also fell victim, I would say, to greed and a lot of things. There was obviously at a point when you reach $200 million in worth, why are you continuing to operate a completely illicit business? I'm not sure. And certainly with the series where you see Bumpy Johnson's, the series that was done with Forrest Whitaker, I think it's called The Godfather of Harlem. You see that there was an aspect of Harlem that really required the African-American people to control the heroin trade and the drug trade within their community. Otherwise, they didn't control their own neighborhood. And so that's all fascinating to me. And then the interaction there that's portrayed in that series that has to do with Bumpy Johnson's interaction with the black activism of the time and the Islamic Brotherhood, and therefore I think would have had some connection to the Black Panthers and that side of things. You can see that this is all political, and there's a reason I'm bringing up crime and government and legitimacy and all this stuff is that at some level, right? I was talking about this last night. I was watching with a date. I was watching the movie Road to Perdition with Tom Hanks, which is a movie about the Irish mafia, and Tom Hanks is kind of a hitman person, right? But I was talking about, wow, how fundamentally our whole society here and government and how America was built, a lot of it's built on organized crime. The question I have is how much of that organized crime exists today, but has only moved on to the corporate and legitimized side of our world and is controlling it in much the same way. Not, corporatized violence at this point would just be using the police department, right, to outsource your violence instead of sending hitmen or sending made guys to go murder somebody. Instead, they can just put you in prison or do the power, right? Once you make it up a layer, and that's where I come back to talking about the layer cake. The idea of the layer cake is that in that movie, the protagonist, which is played by Daniel Craig, reaches a point where he's trying to make it out of the game. He's trying to make it to the next layer, to a place where he can retire from the illicit business, move on with his life, settle down with an attractive woman, maybe have a family, and he's in this very dynamic space, and he meets this very wealthy, powerful man, and this man tells him, hey, and I wish I knew that actor's name. He's a British actor as well. And, he tells him, look, this is the layer cake. And he's like, when you're born, and especially if you're not born to a wealthy family, right, you're born at the bottom of the layer cake, and shit flows downhill. So you're just taking shit the whole time when you're young. And if you're smart and you've got serious ambition and you're pushing hard, maybe you start to make it up that layer cake a little bit. And in each level, you take a little less shit and a little less shit, a little less shit. And he's telling him this at the top of a skyscraper that he's building himself, that he's basically owns and is at the top of whatever that corporate structure is. And so basically he's at the top of the layer cake, and he's explaining that once you reach the top of the layer cake, you don't take shit anymore. You're free, right? That's kind of the idea of the pursuit of happiness too, right? Once he made it far enough in that, once he made partner in that brokerage, once he made it to that level, he's free. We all want to make it there. There's a bunch of things that are in the way of that. First of all, there's 8 billion of us trying to make it there. 8 billion, right? And the systems in place have really figured out how to maintain control over where they're at. So in the old days, you had actual physical slavery, right? We had domination from royal families and monarchs and things like that, and structures that used very overt, direct-in-your-face control, domination, and violence. We still have that today in other regimes that are totalitarian, or in some of the communist spaces that are out there, right? They're still using those tactics, but I think they're there's a danger to them. You could see that with that operational, mode, there's always the potential for a coup. There's always the potential for an uprising, because people are you're putting people to in such a place of misery. What do they have to lose, right? And even, but it's funny because Louis C.K. makes a joke about suicide, about why do people keep living? Some of these people's lives are so terrible. Why would you continue on? And I wonder that in some of these places, why don't these people rise up now? Why would you stay in North Korea, where I've watched some videos and read some things about the conditions there being absolutely horrendous? People starving in the streets, all kinds of atrocities happening within those nation state borders, and yet nobody's rising up, right? And why is that happening? Why? Just because the sheer force of the government? Yeah, the government could wipe everyone out, but what do they have then? They got nothing. So you have to have this willingness to die in those extreme circumstances, to change your political environment, and so that's a whole nother aspect, right? But the point is that what I'm saying is the question of how do you get to this level of financial freedom, I believe is getting very, very difficult. So when I was growing up at the time that the era I came from, we were told you go to college. You get a degree, you make something of yourself in that way, and you become a doctor, you become a lawyer, you become, an engineer, you become an educated person with a skill in usually a very academic side of life. And there was a less and less focus on the more blue collar skills. And those skill-based jobs weren't as emphasized, right? And I think that also created a situation here in the United States, right, where you can see a lot of our manufacturing, everything was outsourced, and we don't have the same level of skilled workers that we once had. Craftsmen, people that work with their hands, people that do things, in a real space. Versus people that are just in front of a screen all the time. But that was our environment, right? And so many of us that came from that went to school and did those things. And I was certainly one who went to school. I went to school. I was in a PhD program for mathematics. I went that far with it. I was also unhappy. So that's another aspect that I think plays a role in this. Like, as you're going through your life and you're going, okay, I want to make progress towards this financial freedom. I want to become successful. I don't want to be this slave to the matrix for the rest of my life, where I barely have, a few pennies in my bank account, and it's just, the constant work just to pay the next bill. I want to get past that, right? But in the pursuit of that, how miserable am I? Going to school for whatever it is that I think is the next industry. Right. So it's like, maybe I hate that. Maybe that's not what I want to do. Maybe the next industry, let's say the next industry at the time frame was in the IT world, right? Let's say it was developing a skill around actual programming, right? Let's say computer programming, and you hate that. And yet that to you is really the way out, right? That's the financial success opportunity that is afforded to you. And so you go, okay, well, I'm just going to do what I hate, just so I can make it to that financial, freedom level. And then what? That's what you're going to do the rest of your life. So you're miserable now, right? Doing something that works. Okay, sure, you got the job, you got everything, but every day you hate going to that job. Every day you hate having to deal with whatever it is that comes with whatever the job is. I give you one example. There could be many other types of examples. And of course, this is kind of brings up the case of the movie Office Space, for those of you who've seen that movie, right? Office Space, you see the protagonist. What's the actor's name? I can't think of his name. It's on the tip of my tongue. But you see him go through this disillusionment with work, what is he doing in this cubicle space? All the great characters in there, Lumbergh, the boss, right? The guy with the stapler, all these people, right? Miserable at this cubicle job. But it pays the bills, and they got a 401k, and they got medical, right? So they've got what supposedly is the American dream, but they're freaking miserable. And I kind of have a problem with that movie, in that I love the movie. It's a great movie. It's hilarious. It brings up a lot of funny points about what really is rewarded in society. It's not necessarily hard work that's rewarded, because as he goes through the HR process where they're laying off people in that movie, right, he just stops showing up to work and he starts being just straight up with the corporate firing team that's been brought in, and they are refreshed by it. They love it. They think he's just great for whatever reason. And they think he's a unique thinker and that he's an asset to the company. It's hilarious. And it's obviously a joke, but there's some truth to that, where some guy who's put his head down, maybe not the most likable guy, maybe not the most charismatic, but he just shafted, doesn't get the promotion, right? And so in the end, my problem with the movie is that in the end, he ends up, they almost get caught for this scheme where they're trying to rip the company off. And there's kind of like this idea, because Jennifer Aniston's character says, oh, stealing is wrong. And there's this like moral kind of ethical thing. I disagree with that. Stealing from some people, I don't have a problem from stealing. There's certain individuals out there, certain corporate entities, let's put it that way. I wouldn't have a problem stealing from them. You know what? Some people may not like what I'm saying there. Well, I'm going to tell you right now, there are certain corporate interests where I would rob them blind if I was given the opportunity, because I know they don't give a goddamn about me. So why should I care about them, right? And so, and I don't feel anything. I don't feel bad about stealing from them versus would I go into a mom and pop or, someone who's scratching their way through survival and steal from them? No. And I do believe there's some ethics to that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be kind of the idea of the Robin Hood idea, right? There's this stealing from the rich to give to the poor type idea exists within our society for a reason. There's a reason that that's a story that's been around for a very long time. And I certainly sense that. But it's funny in the movie, right? They put this moral, ethical thing where Jennifer Aniston is like, this is wrong, you're stealing, and of course they almost get caught, but there's the staple guy burns the place to the ground. It's hilarious. And but the problem I have ultimately with the movie is that the protagonist ends up working construction. And he makes it seem like that's such a great choice. He's working outside. He loves it. He's in the sun. He's got fresh air. He's not in the cubicle anymore. This is what he needed to do. And maybe there's some truth to that. That kind of goes along with finding your thing that you enjoy and then making that work for you. And then you make a living doing that. And I think maybe there's truth to that. I definitely think there's some truth to that. But what the problem I had with the idea that construction job was better than that cubicle job is most guys will tell you about real construction work and how hard it is. And these guys sometimes don't live very long, and they're subject to the same miseries as a guy in the cubicle is, and with different physical ailments and maybe some different mental struggles, but it's still all the same thing. You're still a wage slaver that has to show up to that job on the construction side. Maybe you're showing up at 5:30 in the morning, right? Working some long shift, going home to just having worked your life away, right? So it isn't solving your problem, is my point. I guess if you love construction work, if you really were like, every day I go to this construction job, it's just like me going surfing, right? I love it so much. Then you won the lottery somehow. But I don't know too many people are like that. And the problem is that we're not built for this life. When the Industrial Revolution took hold and we began to see the emergence of industries, when you start to see ideas around communism, right? You start to see the emergence of the Marxist ideas and I forget the other gentleman's name, and then the early kind of French revolutionaries that saw that these very small percentage of people were owning all the wealth, and that what was called later in like Russia and the socialist movements there, the proletariat, were the ones always working in these factories and just having horrendous, horrible lives. And of course, they didn't have OSHA and safety, standards that we might have in the West now, but it was a crappy life. And so they tried to come up with alternative solutions. One was this communist idea, right? We all have the same wealth together. And you can see some of this stuff coming up again and again. Like you can see it on some of the TikTok and YouTube videos out there where people are saying, hey, we have these billionaires, and if we were to divvy up that wealth that those billionaires are kind of hoarding within their very small group, we could abolish homelessness, and we could abolish starvation, and we could give everyone a leg up to be able to live in an egalitarian world where we all live in a utopia where we don't have to work such long hours, and we all are afforded maybe we're all middle class, let's say, or we're all even upper middle class if we were able to. I don't know what the wealth distribution. I'm not sure what those numbers mean and exactly what would happen if you did that. I'm not an economist, so I'm not sure that even works because, for a lot of reasons. One thing that really doesn't work is communism. We know it doesn't work because of human nature. It's not an economics problem. It's a human nature problem. So when you go through this transition from capitalism to communism, you go through this transition of the socialist state. And the socialist state then takes over all the wealth. And then what happens is they never let go of it. And you have guys like Putin, and you have guys like the, Chinese Communist Party that are at the top, and the people who end up being really wealthy, right? Like if you're in a communist nation, it's called the Chinese Communist Party, right? There shouldn't be any poor people and rich people. If it really was a functioning idea, you would have everyone at the same level of wealth, and that's clearly not the case in China, and it just doesn't work. So, and it has really terrible consequences because usually those socialist state governments they always have a much higher degree of control over the populace, and always have a totalitarian regime that exercises cruel use of power. So what it comes down to is, and it stuck with me when 50 Cent, Curtis Jackson did the song, he actually did the movie, right? And maybe, I don't know if he did a song, but he did the movie, Get Rich or Die Trying, right? Get Rich or Die Trying. And that was my life. That really was my life. I hated where I was going with the math career. The math career was going to make me only be able to be a math professor. I had done pure math. I did it because I was lost. I didn't have the right mentorship at home. See, this is why it gets so complicated, right? So I didn't have the right mentorship at home. So when someone asks me, like, how do I change my situation? There's so many factors involved with it because you're talking about your entire life situation. Like, what was your mentorship scenarios? What are your attributes that you were able to attain that would be helpful in finding this financial freedom and liberation? But also then you have to look, what are the ones that aren't helpful? What are the ones that are holding me back, right? Like we talked about with the drug dealers in the hoods of America, having this idea of, well, I'm going to be dead in 5 years, so I may as well live it up now. That's a belief. And that belief is founded in high statistics, sure, but it's also how those people are operating. And because they're operating a certain way with extreme exposure and not trying to mitigate those circumstances, then of course the outcomes are always leading to that. They aren't looking at how can we really, shape this in a way that I could insulate myself. And insulation is definitely a part of the illicit world. And how do you insulate yourself? And of course, these cartel bosses in south of the border, in Mexico especially, have really gotten good at insulation, right? And of course, they're working with all governments of the world at this point. It's a naive thing to think that cartels are not operating at a governmental level and that metric tons of illicit products are making it into the United States just because customs can't keep up. It's actually definitely there's backroom deals going on. Those cartels are working with CIA members and all kinds of members of the United States government, the Mexican government, and all governments involved. So Get Rich or Die Trying was the route I decided to take because my father passed away. I was miserable. I suffered mental health issues. I then, hated what I was doing anyway. My parents put a lot of pressure on me because it's like, what are you going to do with your life, right? And that's the way most parents are that if you don't come from a completely broken home, right? So the focus is like, you're going to have to grow up one day and get a job and, become this, participating member of society. And I never wanted to do that ever. And so what I didn't realize is that everything is a skill. And this is where the question you're asking really reaches a part that also is one of those things that we probably don't want to hear. What skills have you been building for the past 10, 20, 30 years, right? And how do they function in, propelling you towards your goal? And so without the right mentorship, I didn't realize that everything could be approached as a skill. For instance, Rastafarianism, the true Rastafarianism, in my understanding of it, and maybe some people will correct me in the comments, we'll see. True Rastafarianism is a complete renouncement of society. They call it Babylon. They don't want to have anything to do with it. There are people out there who claim to be Rasta and they smoke weed and they listen to they listen to reggae. That isn't Rastafarianism. Rastafarianism really comes from, I believe, from the slave times. And it comes from realizing we don't want to participate in this system of ownership and really what is tyranny and a completely unfair system ruled by a select few. So we aren't going to participate at all. So true Rastafarians, in my understanding, are almost always homeless and live in a way to sustain that their absolute lack of contribution to the society. So they won't pay taxes. They don't buy from grocery stores if they can avoid it. They, maybe take alms, begging, whatnot. Maybe they provide services through crafts and skills that they have, but they refuse to participate in the system, right? Well, what didn't occur to me is that was actually where I was headed. One time I was homeless for almost a year. And I experienced hypothermia, sleeping outdoors in the winter, and really uncomfortable conditions in the summer, and just the environmental conditions, because you aren't, protected. And you have no structure to deal with that, and so it was very uncomfortable. But I also had a high degree of freedom, and my homeless years were the happiest of my life. They were, to this day, still, the time where I spent homeless was the happiest of my life. But what I didn't look at it from a perspective of is there was actually a skill. If I had looked at homelessness as a skill that I could approach it with, how would I do this and become the master of being, let's call it more of a gypsy lifestyle, right? If I had looked at that as a skill, I could have chosen that path. I didn't choose that path. Now that path is going to get harder and harder, because that's what this, right? There's people trying to live the van lifestyle. Well, go try and live the van lifestyle in Carlsbad, and you're going to kick your parking spaces. You're going to get kicked out of them a lot. You aren't allowed to park anywhere. If you don't pay for parking, if you don't pay for your space in this world, you're not allowed to be in this world. That's what's happening more and more. So your frustration, right, over where you're at financially is absolutely founded in reality, right? If you don't pay for your space, you can't stay there. Right. And especially if it's in a nicer area, especially if you want to be by the beach or you want to be somewhere, you are not going to be afforded that allowance to be there if you aren't paying for that. And that's the ugliness of our capitalist world. And I get the communist idea, but the communist idea is not going to work for the reasons I've already stated. So, right. So what do you do? So I went and get rich or die trying. That's what I went. And I decided, fuck it. I was very, very unhappy, and I decided I had nothing to lose, and I went into basically the transportation world and the drug world for many years. And in the beginning, I went into it with a completely don't give a fuck attitude, and that got me busted pretty quickly. I went to jail on pretty serious charges. I had firearms on me. I had almost been killed already at least one or two times, and so I was in the habit of carrying guns at that time. And when I got busted that first time, it really kind of solidifies things for you once you've chosen a path. So I didn't realize I had chosen a path at that point. I was kind of aimless and just going, fucking, I'm so miserable. I already had a master's degree at that point. I had worked for the government as a civil contractor, basically for the Navy. I had worked at a naval warfare assessment facility, and I was in the metrology sciences. Oh God, that was a miserable job, let me tell you. And it was funny because they had paid me at that time, which had been around, this was around 2004 or 2003. It was 2003. They were paying me around $48,000 a year. And the funny thing is that was the most money I'd ever made. And because of that, I thought it was a lot of money until my first trip to Vegas, where we went to Vegas and I blew a whole check and realized, wow, that wasn't a lot of money. And that was how naive and young I was. And so as time went on, right, and the misery set in with the job, and I looked around me, everyone was just working towards that pension. Most of the people that were in those jobs, and it was absolutely a cubicle space job, just like Office Space. And I was not allowed to leave even though my work would be finished for the day. So that was awful too. And I was salary, right? So I wasn't getting paid any more money to stay there. Boy, was that a miserable position. And my romantic life sucked. And there was just so much that was, that's why I made those choices. Well, what I didn't realize is when I made those choices to go into this now, illicit trade, that once I got busted, that was like sealing the deal. I was in. Like there was you're not getting out now, because now what, right? I can't go back to the government job. I can't, there weren't many people who are going to hire me, right? So what am I going to do? And now I'm facing incarceration, and I was actually facing a pretty serious sentence. The first DA was trying to give me 4 to 8 years. And a lot of the attorneys that I went and saw were telling me, hey, you're screwed. You're going to prison. And so then what? I got to pay for my attorney fees. Now, I was never the guy to run home to mom and dad, and my dad was already dead anyway. So I didn't go home crying to mom and saying I need money for an attorney. I didn't go home crying to mom saying I need money for bail. I bailed myself out. I didn't go home with any of that information. In fact, I hid it from my mother for a year until I was facing sentencing, and I thought I might go to prison. I wasn't sure. You walk into that courtroom, you don't know what the deal is finally going to be. So I wasn't sure if I was about to be, handcuffed and taken into custody. So she came out into the driveway where she noticed I was not in a good frame of mind. I was kind of really in a dark mood, and I had to come clean with her. But the point is, I didn't ask her for help. And so if I'm not asking for help, I took responsibility for my actions. I knew I had got myself in this situation. Then what? Well, the only option at that point that I could see was to continue down this path. And so I went straight back to the drug trade with a very different attitude, though, extremely careful and very, very on a different level of I was not in a state of don't give a fuck anymore. I was taking it seriously. I knew the consequences were very serious. And I don't know why, like I said, it was because of grief. It was because I hadn't processed my internal emotional status, that I was doing really stupid things like driving around with drugs and guns for no apparent reason. Even if I wasn't going to meet someone or deal with something, I still had drugs and guns in the car. It was just stupid. It was just dumb. And I've seen lots of people make those kind of mistakes. But that was where I was at in my head at the time. Then I took it seriously, right? And what happened was this long journey where I was in the game forever, 20 plus years, and eventually made real headway, bought, properties, made it to a place where I had something. And now the drug trade's a dying trade. Actually, it's become almost corporatized, and the cartels have gotten such a strong hold on it. It doesn't really matter what substance you go into anymore. So the marijuana world went legal and really destroyed the business and created an opportunity even more for cartels because they use slave labor, right, to produce products that are cheaper than what anyone else can produce who doesn't use slave labor. And you've got this competitiveness at a whole that makes it impossible to make money in the marijuana trade unless you're very, very smart. And there's these people who are very smart. They're very good at finding their niches, or they're very well backed. They're very well connected, right? They're, like Mike Tyson had his brand of cannabis, and he was having some of his, I know there's a billboard on the 215 that had to do with Mike Tyson's cannabis company, what he's doing and stuff, right? Are you going to compete with Mike Tyson? I'm not. I don't think I'm going to get anywhere near competing with Mike Tyson, right? That guy's a legend, a huge icon. So I think what I wish someone had told me when I was 15 years old or younger is that skills are everything, right? And I'm not sure right now, as the world is changing, what those skills really are. Are the skills in, social media marketing and influencing? Are those skills in developing businesses in the modern world and finding a way to navigate that? And what are those skills? I don't even know what those skills are. Honestly, that's the problem, right? Like, are those skills, what do they have to do with? Like, what I'm saying is where I came from is, I had the Scarface mentality. I had my word and my balls, and that got me where I'm at. It honestly did. I had my word and I had my balls, and that worked. I don't believe that'll work anymore. I actually am seeing a world where I don't know if that really works. Like, and there's fighters, right? So there's guys trying to be fighters. So if you were to step into the competitive fight world, right? If you were young enough, let's say, what are the chances you're going to make it there? They're not great, right? And how many friends do I have that are really talented fighters, right? Really tough guys. I wouldn't want to ever tangle with these guys. And yet they never made it, right? They never made it to that point, that big level where you're making all that money, right? Where you've got that name and that that setup. It's such a difficult world. And my message is somewhat pessimistic in a way. And I feel that one of the issues that we're absolutely seeing is overpopulation, and people don't want to hear this, but this goes back to the 13th century, right? 14th century, 1300s, with the Black Plague. One of the huge lessons of the Black Plague was what peasant class quality of life was, based on their position as peasants, and what the Black Plague did to their standing in life, to their quality of life. And what the Black Plague did was improve their life exponentially. It was an enormous improvement in their quality of life after all those people died. Whatever it was, 2/3 of the world population, perished. I don't know what the numbers are, but tens of millions of people died in a time when there already wasn't a lot of people, and drastically life improved for those folks because they were more valuable. Right? There was less competition for resources, less competition for positions under that royalty. Now, the royalty still maintained their position, but lost a bit of their hold on things because now, as an individual, you're worth more. It's the most simplistic economic equation there is, supply and demand. And what we don't seem to realize is that applies to human life itself. The more of it there is, the more worthless it becomes. And that's what's happening to all of us. We're worthless, right? There's so many drug traffickers. There's so many IT guys. There's so many marketers. There's so many influencers. There's so many of everything, right? How do you compete in that world? And that's why I'm saying this is a rather pessimistic message at this point. I haven't figured it out. I don't know. Like, you know what I mean? Like, my mentor is semi-famous. He's an amazing martial artist and just an iconic individual. And I know he hasn't made it to that point. I don't know if he owns his own home. He's in his 60s, right? So it's like, and I don't know what his savings are. Maybe he's got a nice chunk put away. I hope he does. I really hope he does. But I know it's been a struggle for him. And I know that, the reason I respect him so much, he doesn't complain one single day ever. That guy and his work ethic and what he brings to the table as a teacher and a mentor and a trainer is absolutely amazing. But my point is, right, he's not on a yacht somewhere. He's not, sipping pina coladas on a beach. He's working every damn day and he's in his 60s, right? And that's not what I want for myself. So the honest truth, this is something that people in my position never want to admit, right? The honest truth is I'm not sure anymore. I don't know what the answer is. There was a time when I think I could have said to you, hey, you know what? Grow a pair, get out there, take some big risks, put everything you got into it, develop some skills, and you'll make it. I'm not sure if that's true anymore. I'm really not. I really don't know, what the answer is. I think efficiency is always important, right? But if you've been living poor for this long, you're already probably pretty damn efficient, right? So what is the thing that's missing, right? I know that what I'm trying to do is break free. And I know that this is one thing. Okay. So I'm the type of person who talks and processes. Here's an idea for you. I think we got to come together. We got to form alliances. One thing that's happening is we're too separated in our society, right? If we're able to build something together and create something, I don't know what that something is. Is it our own corporation? Is it our own movement? Is it our own, I don't know what, right? This is just the beginning of something, right? What is it that we're building? We're building a collaboration in which we say, hey, we're tired of this. We're sick of this. What can we do to influence our marketplace in such a way that we get a bigger market share and get a better wage, a better earning for ourselves, so we can have some freedom? Because what the issue is, we're not free. That we're always slaving for this damn next bill. And I can feel the matrix all the time. I mean, every time I make a little money, I get another bill. Like, even me, where I'm at, and I'm at a much better position, right? Like I said, I own a couple of properties. I got stuff going for me, but I don't have $1 million sitting in a bank account somewhere, or have, and like, I invested in some stocks. I had a real belief in one stock that I just believed in it, and it turned out they're doing shady shit, and I lost a bunch of money on that. I was pissed. And it wasn't just a smart investment, because it probably wasn't smart what I did, but I really believed in what that company was doing, and it turned out they're full of shit, right? And I lost this money there. And I mean, they're a legitimate company. They really are working on the cure to cancer. They really made headway, but the investment practices that they did and the mistakes they made in their manufacturing chain really cost me and cost a lot of investors what they did. And there was some what appears to be some sort of stock manipulation in order to drive the stock down, maybe to buy at a lower level themselves and get, take their own wealth. Who knows? But they're under a lawsuit, investigation from the SEC, and all kinds of things now. So the point is that you're always hit, right, with this next bill, this next thing. You start to get to a place where you feel like, oh, I'm making some traction. Boom, the next thing hits you. And like, I have a friend who's in the martial arts world who's been really successful with laundromats, right? I think he was telling me the other day one of his laundromats is bringing in $100,000 gross a year, which is pretty good. I don't know what his overhead is. I think he's got decent overhead like all these businesses, But he told me, he said, I want a way out. I got to find a way out. He said, because government regulation and taxation is making it impossible for him to operate that business and actually make a living that's going to lead to him having health care when he's older, having a retirement, having a way to live a bit of a free life and enjoy himself, right? He's not seeing that way out now. And so he's going, man, what's the next thing? So he started day trading. He started doing, he's doing some sort of stock trading. I don't know if I should say he's doing day trading. He's working with stock options and he's trying to become a trader and somehow generate income that way. And so he really got kind of serious into that. And that's a skill. Hey, I don't know enough about that skill, but that's definitely a skill. And if you're good enough at it, I don't know what AI is going to mean for that world. It's already having in effect. Obviously, these large brokerages are able to beat everyone to the punch when it comes to buying and selling. So you're at the mercy of that stuff. So I'm not sure how long that opportunity is going to exist. But the point is, I didn't develop that skill. I wish I had, because maybe there's really something there. But what I see is this, right? Where organized crime really came from was people came together who were poor and came from other countries and were mostly immigrants and said, look, life is so rough here, and we see these rich people, enjoying the benefits of being at the top of of that layer cake, and we want our piece. And so they used their word and their balls, they went for it, took enormous risks, but they came together. And that's what's really important. That's what the story of unions are, right? Unions are the same thing, which then, of course, were also infiltrated and affected by the organized crime, entities that existed. And so now you had, but it's coming from the same place. We want our piece. So when you say as an individual person, well, this is what I think. This is what I'm processing this on the fly while I'm saying this, because I've kind of covered all the pessimistic crap. And okay, what are the options? I think what it is we have to get people who are in the same situation stuck together. We have to come together, because together we have power, and we have to start doing something. I'm not saying it has to be crime. I'm not saying we need to become a new organized crime, entity of some sort, but we need to come together and come up with ideas and utilize the collective power in order to gain some sort of, power for ourselves. And that's what's going on with everything, right? When you look at real estate, why housing is so just jacked right now, because it's funny, because I see all this pushback on the Airbnb business, and the Airbnb, and the short-term vacation rental business is an issue, but it's not an issue because guys like me, I got 1-2 rentals, right? No, it's because these large corporations like BlackRock and others are buying so much housing up that it drives the price of housing up, and they don't want to sell it, right? They want you to be a renter, to be paying into their matrix scheme. You're just fuel, right? You're just feeding your life's blood, your time, your effort into renting from them, and they've cornered the market, and that's what they're doing because they have all that power. So it's not easy to fight against that, and I think we need to collaborate as people come together, network, figure out where are the financial opportunities, and we need to not always be too selfish, right? Too much about ourselves. And this was something that was an interesting video I watched about I forget what it was called, kind of the categories of stupid. It had to do with intelligence and ranking intelligence and stupidity. And what a stupid person does, according to this theory, is a stupid person costs other people at their own expense. So because let's use like haters as an example, some sort of person who's a hater and hates to see other people succeed, right? At the lowest level form of that, they will be willing to sacrifice their own position and even harm themselves in order to harm the other person as well. That's stupid thinking, right? Another format, a category of in this intelligence matrix were the bandits. Bandits were the people who are willing to cost other people for their own gain. So they'll tear you down, but they gain from it. So they're not stupid, but they're not considered intelligent in this matrix. There's one, I'm forgetting the name. I forget what the category was. It was like a category where, people that get taken advantage of. It was like people who are kind of too much of a pushover, and they work and they do generate some sort of I guess we can call it wealth or resources, but they're always taken advantage of. right? They're taken advantage by the bandits. They're taken advantage by people who are always taking from them. And then there's the smart, the intelligent people in this categorization. And those people benefit themselves and also benefit those around them. And those people were in this, and I forget what the theory is called, but this was the kind of categorization of levels of intelligence. And I think that's what we need to become. We need to try to fit ourselves together all at the level of intelligent people, where we are benefiting ourselves while we benefit those around us. And we're going to need to organize somehow. I'm not sure in 2023 what that organization looks like right now, but I know that in the business I'm building with the psychedelics world, and with that whole endeavor, right, it's going to take people collaborating. So I need people to collaborate. I need people to believe in the vision. I need to, and there needs to be a real market there. And there is. There's definitely a market in that world, but we've got some uphill climbs because we've got a lot of stigma and we got laws against us and we got issues there. But yeah, I think the only answer I can come up with at the moment is we need to start collaborating more, but that's a tough nut to crack because we live in a world where your neighbors won't even talk to you. Where, right, like when you approach people, nobody will give you the time of day because there's so many scammers, there's so much crap out there, there's so many people trying to take advantage, there's so many bandits, right? There's so many of the bandits and the haters out there that people just put up a wall and don't want to interact because it's like, I'm just going to keep, doing what I'm doing. But I think a lot of us out here are miserable with the circumstance where we feel completely held, our heads are just being pushed underwater constantly. Even for those of us who have made it to that upper middle class level, I would say I've made it to upper middle class. I'm not rich. But I am clawing with everything I got to hold that position, not lose it. Because there is the danger of me losing it. And that's because of governmental regulation, right? I'm involved in a massive lawsuit with a city that they're trying to destroy me. For what? Right? And the weird part is those are stupid people. I'll tell you why. They are damaging themselves to damage me. Makes no sense whatsoever. They would make money off of my business. They would make money off the taxes I supply. They would, benefit from my success. Instead, they'd like to tear me down, basically because of ego, because I didn't kiss the ring and bow down before the good old boys club. They've decided to do this, and they're idiots. That's stupidity. And so now I'm in this fight with them. But that's the problem with the world we live in. The world is definitely set up for you to fail. That's my point. This world is tailored by the rich and powerful, by the corporate interests, to have you fail so that you continue to be a wage slaver, so that you're a wage slave the rest of your life and you just feed into this matrix. So I think this could even be a repeating episode where we come up with new ideas for this, because this is an ugly circumstance that many of us are dealing with. Even those of us who have made, real progress, we're still stuck. We're still not where we want to be. We're still having to work every single day. I went on a vacation recently and it wasn't very fun. The whole time I was worried about everything that was going on, and I got calls about, emergency stuff that was happening back home that really needed my attention. And you know what I mean? I didn't get to unhook. I didn't get to really get the respite that I needed. And it wasn't like that at all. And so, yeah, we're definitely, all of us kind of are in this boat unless you've jumped that major layer. And coming back to my layer cake idea, the layer cake idea thing, in my mind anyway, I visualize the layers as all kind of being the same thickness, but actually they're not. And that was what just kind of came to mind for me, is there's these layers that are kind of similar thickness and this lower level from, and probably not even at the poor, like from poor to middle class, there's a big thick layer. It's hard to get through. It's really hard, right? And then there's levels of poor. There's starving, like can't even feed yourself level poor, and homeless level poor. And then there's like living in Section 8, type housing poor. And then there's poor, paying for normal rent poor, but you're barely getting by. There's all these levels of poor. But then the layer between poor and middle class is this big, thick layer, and it's extremely difficult to cross that barrier. And then there's a bunch of levels there in the middle class area, right? Between like middle class, like blue collar, up to middle class, like white collar and, business owner, and maybe like then getting to attorneys and doctors are still kind of upper middle class. And there's a bunch of layers there. And then there's the layer between upper middle class and rich, truly wealthy. And that's the hardest one of them all. That layer's like huge. And you trying to get past that one, and that's what we all want. That's what we all want. That's why like the hip hop industry has been so successful in portraying these images of these rich, wealthy guys flashing their wealth and saying, you know, you can't tell me nothing, fuck you type attitude. It's an awesome idea because we're all inspired by that. Like, imagine if I could have that, right? And yet we're all chasing that carrot. And there's another problem with chasing that carrot is it attainable? Is it attainable? And I read a book that I didn't finish the book. I should pick it up again. But it was called Blue Zones. And blue zones have to do with where people live. They're the highest. They have a higher percentage of centenarians, people who live to be over 100 years old. And in those blue zones, the number one thing that you find is that they're the least stressful lives. So the least stressful your life is, the longer you live, happier you live, the happier you live. Well, the woman who wrote the book was in the corporate world in Tokyo and reached a point where she was miserable and was trying to, what she called, chase that carrot or chase the rabbit, like the dog races where the greyhounds race after that rabbit and they never catch it. And she started to feel like that was her life. And she noticed that Okinawa was a blue zone and that people led a very different life there. They're not involved in at least at that time. I don't know what's happening in Okinawa now, but this book's maybe a decade or two old now. And so she decided to, I believe, move to Okinawa, started a small garden, lived this much more simple life and found a way that worked for her, I guess. And I didn't finish the whole book, but the idea was similar to the office space idea, right? But I don't agree with construction being like the utopia, because let me tell you, construction works hard. But this idea that you simplify your life, you get your small piece of peace, and somehow through efficiency, this works for you. Maybe you're able to do that, right? But that to me seems to be also a shrinking possibility, and it limits you in a lot of things. Like, I'm a surfer, so I need to be by the ocean, but most places by the ocean are far more expensive unless you want to leave the United States, and then you got to figure out how that's all going to work. So yeah, there's a lot to this topic, and I think we're all struggling with the same thing, and we all want to get to the point where we can breathe, where we can have some freedom, where you could take a vacation. I used to take a vacation, sometimes a couple of vacations a year that'd be a month long. That month-long time was amazing. But like, I can't do that now. There's no way. It just wouldn't work. So it's like, we got some more talking to do on this. This is where we're at. This is where we're at, and it's getting worse. And there's more and more people, and there's more and more struggle, right? And it doesn't work in a capitalist scenario. And I get why people are starting to adopt these socialist ideas, even though I disagree with them. I still disagree with it. But the capitalist world is one where someone has to be a winner and someone has to be a loser. And it has to be one where there's more losers than winners. That's the way it works. So, and those people that are winners, they continue to tailor, to rig the system more in their favor. And we're in a tough world. We're definitely a tough world. So that's where I'm at right now. We'll keep talking about it. I don't think it was very helpful, but sorry about that. Okay, guys, hopefully you've been liking the content we've been providing so far. We've been covering a lot of different topics here. And, for long form, you're checking us out here on YouTube. Also, you can find us on Rumble for short form. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok at ThePemPod. Also, be sure to check out psychedelis.com. There we're providing a lot of different services. We've actually made further progress on the development of the website, which eventually will be an app. You can find treatment options there, including retreat centers, clinical facilities, individual trip sitters, clinicians, facilitators, integration coaches. We've got all that up now, and then we've got something called the Learning Center where you can go if you don't really know that much about psychedelic therapy or you want to learn something about a particular niche there. We will be including that soon. So go ahead and check out all of those areas there if you guys want, and just happy to be here with you. So hopefully have you here taking in more of our content in the near future. Thanks. It'd be great if you left a like, and also if you'd leave a comment would be awesome. We'd love to interact with you guys in the comments below. Also, if you would like to have me react to a video that you choose and that you think would be a good one for me to take a look at, or even a personal video or request of some sort, you can email us at thepempod@gmail.com, and I'd love to hear from you and interact with you there.